In the shadow of Chile's towering Andes Mountains, two experienced climbers vanished without a trace. What investigators found 2 years later, carved into a single rock, would shatter everything they thought they knew about this case. Before we dive into this mystery, please like, subscribe to the channel, and comment on what you think happened. Your opinion could be the key to understanding this story. March 15th, 2019. Marcus Chen and Elena Vargas were beginning what should have been their greatest adventure yet. The two friends, both in their early 30s, had spent months planning their assault on Cerro Tres Monjas, a notoriously challenging peak in the remote Andes. Marcus, a software engineer from California, methodically checked his climbing gear one final time. The metallic clink of carabiners filled his hotel room as he organized equipment with precision that had kept him alive through dozens of climbs. Across town, Elena, a local mountain guide with over a decade of experience, was saying goodbye to her 8-year-old daughter, Sophia. "Mommy will be back in 5 days," Elena whispered, stroking Sophia's dark hair as the little girl clung to her mother's weathered climbing jacket. Neither of them knew this would be the last time Sophia would see her mother alive. The drive to Reituadi. The trailhead took 3 hours through winding mountain roads. At 2:30 p.m., they reached the remote parking area where only their vehicle sat alone against the vast wilderness. Elena's final text message to her sister read, "Starting the approach now. Weather looks perfect. See you Sunday." The timestamp showed 2:47 p.m. That was the last anyone heard from them. By Tuesday, when neither climber had returned, Elena's sister contacted local authorities. The rescue teams found their abandoned vehicle exactly where they'd left it, keys still in the ignition, gear bags missing. It was as if the mountain had simply swallowed them whole. For weeks, helicopters circled the peaks like mechanical vultures, their rotor blades echoing off canyon walls. Search dogs followed scent trails that vanished into thin air. Professional rescue teams rappelled down cliff faces and explored every cave system they could find. Nothing. The families held on to hope through that first agonizing year, organizing search parties, printing thousands of missing person flyers, and pleading on social media for information. But as seasons changed and snow covered the peaks where Marcus and Elena had last been seen, hope began to freeze like everything else in those mountains. Then, on a crisp morning in April 2021, exactly 2 years and 1 month after their disappearance, a geology student named Pablo Morales made a discovery that would turn this missing persons case into something far more sinister. But what he found carved into that rock would prove that some mysteries run deeper than anyone could imagine. Pablo Morales never expected to become part of Chile's most haunting mystery. The 23-year-old geology student was conducting routine rock sampling for his thesis when he stumbled upon something that would haunt investigators for months to come. The morning sun cast long shadows across the granite face of Cerro Tres Monjas as Pablo climbed toward his designated research area. His hammer rang against stone with methodical precision, each strike echoing through the thin mountain air. Familiar routine of collecting samples had become almost meditative during his weeks in these remote peaks. But then his hammer struck something different. The sound was hollow, metallic. Pablo brushed away centuries of accumulated dirt and lichen from the rock face, revealing carved symbols that definitely weren't natural formations. His breath caught in his throat as the full scope of his discovery became clear. Etched deep into the granite were coordinates, dates, and most chilling of all, 2 names, M. Chen and E. Vargas. Pablo's hands trembled as he traced the carved letters with his fingertip. The engravings were fresh, maybe a year or 2 old at most. Below the names, Someone had carved a crude map showing a path leading deeper into the mountain, marked with an X, and the word verdad, truth, in Spanish. The young student immediately photographed everything with his phone, though the poor signal meant the images wouldn't upload until he descended. His mind raced with possibilities. Had Marcus and Elena somehow survived their initial disappearance? Had they carved these symbols as a message before meeting their fate? But the more Pablo examined the carvings, the more disturbing questions emerged. The precision of the work suggested someone had spent considerable time creating these marks. The depth of the cuts indicated they were made with proper tools, not improvised equipment that desperate climbers might carry. Most unsettling of all was the date carved beneath the coordinates, April 3rd, 2020, almost a full year after Marcus and Elena had vanished. Pablo spent the rest of that day documenting every detail of the carved rock. As evening approached and temperatures began to drop, he made the difficult decision to camp nearby rather than risk a dangerous nighttime descent. The carved symbols seemed to glow eerily in his flashlight beam as he set up his small tent. Sleep came fitfully. Every wind gust through the peaks sounded like whispered voices, and Pablo found himself checking the carved rock repeatedly throughout the night, as if the symbols might have changed when he wasn't looking. At first light, Pablo began his descent toward civilization, his backpack heavy with rock samples and his camera full of images that would soon turn this case upside down. The coordinates carved into that granite face pointed to a location even deeper in the mountains, a place where no official search team had ever ventured. As Pablo reached cell phone range and his device began buzzing with delayed message notifications, he placed a call to local police. The conversation was brief, but urgent. Within hours, Detective Carmen Rodriguez was studying Pablo's photographs with growing unease. She had worked the original missing persons case and knew every detail by heart. These carvings suggested Marcus and Elena's disappearance was far more complex than anyone had imagined. But the coordinates carved into that rock would lead investigators to a discovery that would prove this wasn't just about two missing climbers anymore. What lay waiting at those coordinates would reveal a secret that some people were willing to kill to protect. Detective Carmen Rodriguez had seen enough missing persons cases to know when something didn't add up. 22 years with the Chilean National Police had taught her to trust her instincts, and every instinct was screaming that Pablo's discovery had blown this case wide open. The coordinates carved into the rock pointed to a section of the Andes that appeared on no tourist maps, a maze of narrow canyons and hidden valleys that even experienced guides avoided. Carmen assembled a specialized team, 3 mountain rescue experts, a forensic photographer, and herself. They would follow the trail that Marcus and Elena might have carved as their final message to the world. The helicopter dropped them as close to the coordinates as the treacherous terrain would allow. From there, they would have to climb on foot through some of Chile's most unforgiving landscape. The thin air made every step a struggle, and loose. Scree shifted dangerously beneath their boots as they navigated narrow ledges. Carmen's radio crackled with static as they climbed higher. The mountains seemed determined to keep their secrets, jamming communication signals and hiding the sun behind towering peaks that cast everything in perpetual twilight. After 6 hours of grueling ascent, the team reached the location specified by the carved coordinates. What they found defied explanation. Hidden in a narrow canyon, completely invisible from above or any established climbing route, stood the remains of what appeared to be a small research station. Metal framework, still, supported tattered fabric walls that fluttered like prayer flags in the mountain wind. Equipment cases lay scattered across a natural shelf of rock, their contents spilled and weathered by 2 years of exposure. But it was what Carmen found inside the largest equipment case that made her blood run cold. Dozens of photographs were preserved in waterproof containers, showing mining operations that clearly weren't authorized by any government agency. The images depicted massive excavation work deep in the mountains, heavy machinery that would have required helicopter transport to reach these remote locations, and workers wearing no identifying uniforms or company logos. More disturbing were the photographs showing environmental devastation. Entire valley systems stripped of vegetation, water sources contaminated with runoff from mining activities, and native wildlife lying dead in contaminated streams. Carmen's forensic photographer documented everything while she examined a weather-beaten logbook found in another container. The handwriting was definitely Elena's. She recognized it from the missing persons file. The final entry was dated March 18, 2019, 3 days after their disappearance. The entry read, "They know we've seen too much. Marcus thinks we can make it to the emergency cache, but they're tracking us with equipment we never saw coming. If something happens to us, the truth is in the photos. The mining operation has no permits. They're destroying protected watersheds and selling the rights to international cartels." Carmen felt the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. Marcus and Elena hadn't simply disappeared during a climbing accident. They had stumbled onto an illegal mining operation, documented evidence of massive environmental crimes, and been silenced for their discovery. But who was behind the operation? The photographs showed faces, equipment serial numbers, and geographical markers that could lead investigators directly to the source. As evening approached and the team prepared to evacuate their findings, Carmen noticed fresh boot prints in the mud near the abandoned research station. The treads were recent, maybe a day or two old at most. Someone else knew about this location. Someone was still monitoring the site where Marcus and Elena had made their final stand. The mountain shadows grew longer as Carmen's team prepared for extraction, but the detective couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched from the peaks above. What they had discovered was just the beginning of a conspiracy that reached far beyond 2 missing climbers and into the highest levels of Chilean society. The evidence Carmen's team extracted from the mountains painted a picture of environmental destruction on a massive scale. Back in Santiago, forensic experts worked around the clock analyzing the photographs, equipment, and Elena's logbook entries. What they uncovered would shake the foundations of Chilean politics. The mining operation captured in Elena's photographs showed systematic extraction of rare earth metals from protected national parkland. Satellite imagery analysis revealed that the illegal mining had been operating for at least 3 years, stripping away pristine wilderness and contaminating water sources that supplied several indigenous communities downstream. But it was the faces in the photographs that made this case explosive. Carmen recognized several individuals as executives from Mincorp International, a Canadian mining company that held legitimate permits in other parts of Chile. However, their authorized operations were hundreds of miles away from where Elena had photographed their equipment and personnel. Even more damaging were images showing uniformed Chilean national police officers providing security for the illegal operation. Carmen felt sick as she recognized Lieutenant Carlos Herrera, a colleague she had worked with for over a decade. The photographs showed him directing workers and coordinating with mining supervisors in areas that were supposedly off-limits to all human activity. Dr. Patricia Nunez, a geologist consulting on the case, analyzed soil samples that Elena had collected before her disappearance. The contamination levels were catastrophic: mercury, arsenic, and other heavy metals at concentrations that would render the watershed uninhabitable for decades. The environmental scientists' report was devastating. The illegal mining operation had destroyed over 50,000 hectares of pristine Andean ecosystem, wiping out habitat for endangered species and contaminating water sources that indigenous communities had depended on for centuries. Carmen realized that Marcus and Elena hadn't just witnessed a crime. They had documented genocide against both the environment and the people who depended on it. As the investigation deepened, Carmen discovered that MinCorp International had been lobbying Chilean officials for expanded mining rights in protected areas. The company had been frustrated by environmental regulations that limited their access to the region's mineral wealth. The illegal operation appeared to be their way of extracting resources while building a case for why regulations should be relaxed. Phone records subpoenaed from MinCorp revealed communication with high-ranking officials in Chile's Ministry of Mining. The messages, hidden behind coded language about geological surveys and environmental assessments, actually discussed bribes, permit bypasses, and strategies for silencing environmental activists. But the most chilling discovery came when Carmen's team analyzed GPS data from Elena's climbing watch, recovered from the Mountain Research Station. The device showed that after documenting the mining operation, Elena and Marcus had attempted to reach a communication point where they could report their findings to authorities. They never made it. The GPS track ended abruptly at a location marked in Elena's logbook as Punto de no retorno, point of no return. The coordinates pointed to a narrow canyon where the terrain became impossible to navigate without specialized equipment. Carmen assembled another expedition team to investigate the final GPS coordinates. What they would find at the point of no return would prove that Marcus and Elena's deaths weren't accidental. They were calculated murder. As the helicopter lifted off toward the remote canyon, Carmen couldn't help but wonder how many other environmental activists had disappeared in these mountains, and how many crimes had been buried beneath the pristine snow that covered the peaks like a shroud. The conspiracy they were uncovering reached far beyond illegal mining. It was about the systematic silencing of anyone who threatened powerful interests that viewed Chile's wilderness as nothing more than resources waiting to be extracted. The canyon that Elena had marked as Punto de no retorno lived up to its ominous name. Carved by millennia of glacial meltwater, the narrow gorge twisted through the mountains like a wound in the earth itself. Carmen's expedition team rappelled into the canyon using climbing equipment that Marcus and Elena would never have carried for a routine mountaineering trip. 50 meters down the canyon walls, they found the first sign of what had really happened to the missing climbers. Embedded in a crack in the canyon wall was a piece of Elena's distinctive red climbing helmet. The plastic cracked and weathered by 2 years of mountain weather. But what made Carmen's team stop breathing was the unmistakable pattern of bullet holes surrounding the helmet fragment. This wasn't a climbing accident. This was an execution site. Carmen's forensic photographer documented everything while the team searched the canyon floor for additional evidence. What they found painted a picture of Marcus and Elena's final, desperate hours. The climbers had descended into the canyon pursuing the only escape route available after discovering the mining operation. GPS data showed they had moved methodically through the maze-like passage, probably hoping to reach a communication point where they could alert authorities to what they had witnessed. But someone had been tracking them. Spent rifle cartridges, scattered across rock ledges, showed that gunmen had positioned themselves at strategic points throughout the canyon. The ballistics pattern suggested a coordinated ambush designed to prevent any escape. Marcus and Elena had been trapped in what amounted to a killing field. Carmen discovered Elena's climbing pack wedged behind a boulder, its contents still partially intact despite 2 years of exposure. Inside, wrapped in waterproof material, was a memory card containing additional photographs and a voice recording that Elena had made during their final hours. The audio file was heartbreaking. Elena's voice, strained with fear and exhaustion, described their desperate flight through the mountains after discovering the mining operation. She detailed how armed men in military-style clothing had pursued them, using sophisticated tracking equipment that suggested this was far more than a spontaneous hunt. "They have helicopters, Marcus," Elena's recorded voice whispered. "Professional equipment. This isn't just about keeping us quiet. They've done this before. We found 3 other campsites hidden in the canyon system, all abandoned, all with personal belongings left behind." Carmen's blood ran cold. Marcus and Elena weren't the first environmental activists to disappear in these mountains. They were just the latest victims in a systematic campaign of murder designed to protect the illegal mining operation. The memory card contained photographs of the other abandoned campsites Elena had mentioned. Each showed signs of hasty abandonment: tents left standing, food still in containers, personal items scattered as if their owners had fled in panic. Carmen recognized camping gear and equipment from at least 6 different missing persons cases that had been classified as wilderness accidents over the past 5 years. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Someone had been systematically eliminating anyone who threatened to expose the illegal mining operation, then covering up the murders by staging them as mountaineering accidents in one of Chile's most dangerous wilderness areas. But Elena's final photograph on the memory card revealed the face of their killer. The image, taken from behind a boulder as Elena hid from her pursuers, showed Lieutenant Carlos Herrera directing a team of armed men through the canyon. The corrupt police officer wasn't just providing security for the mining operation, he was personally eliminating witnesses who could expose the environmental crimes. Carmen realized that bringing down this conspiracy would mean taking on corrupt officials within her own department, powerful international mining interests, and killers who had spent years perfecting their methods of making people disappear in the wilderness. As the team prepared to extract evidence from the canyon, Carmen noticed something that made her heart race: fresh boot prints in the sandy canyon floor, leading directly to where they had discovered Elena's pack. Someone had been here recently, searching for the same evidence Carmen's team had just found. The conspiracy knew the investigation was closing in, and they were preparing to eliminate anyone who threatened to expose the truth. Carmen knew that returning to Santiago with Elena's evidence would be like walking into a trap. Lieutenant Carlos Herrera had access to police communications, investigation reports, and knowledge of every move her team made. If he was willing to murder environmental activists, he wouldn't hesitate to eliminate a detective who had uncovered his crimes. Instead of heading directly back to headquarters, Carmen made a decision that would either save her life or end her career. She drove to the offices of La Tercera, Chile's most respected investigative newspaper, where journalist Miguel Santos had been following environmental corruption stories for over a decade. Santos listened with growing amazement as Carmen played Elena's recorded voice and showed him the photographs, documenting the illegal mining operation. The journalist understood immediately that this story would expose corruption reaching the highest levels of Chilean government and international mining interests. Working through the night, Santos and Carmen cross-referenced the evidence with his own investigation into missing environmental activists. The pattern was undeniable. Over the past 5 years, 12 activists and researchers had disappeared in the same mountain region where MinCorp International was conducting illegal mining operations. Each disappearance had been classified as a mountaineering accident by investigating officers who reported directly to Lieutenant Herrera. Each case had been closed quickly, with minimal investigation and no recovery of bodies. The systematic cover-up had allowed the illegal mining to continue undetected while eliminating anyone who posed a threat. But Santos had been gathering his own evidence. His investigation had uncovered financial records showing massive payments from MinCorp International to offshore accounts linked to Chilean officials. The mining company had spent over $15 million in bribes to secure protection for their illegal operations. The money trail led directly to Deputy Minister of Mining Eduardo Vasquez, who had been instrumental in creating policies that limited environmental oversight of mining activities in remote areas. Vasquez had accepted payments disguised as consulting fees while ensuring that government inspections never reached the areas where MinCorp was operating illegally. Carmen realized that the conspiracy involved more than just corrupt police officers and mining executives. High-ranking government officials had created a system that allowed environmental crimes to be committed with impunity, while systematically eliminating anyone who threatened to expose the truth. As dawn broke over Santiago, Santos prepared to publish the most explosive environmental scandal in Chilean history. But Carmen knew that releasing the story would paint targets on both their backs. The people behind this conspiracy had killed 12 environmental activists to protect their secrets. They wouldn't hesitate to kill a detective and a journalist. Carmen's phone buzzed with a text message from Lieutenant Herrera. "Where are you? Need to debrief on the mountain expedition immediately." The corrupt officer was already moving to control the narrative and eliminate any evidence that could expose the mining conspiracy. Carmen realized she had hours, maybe minutes, before Herrera discovered that she had uncovered Elena's evidence and connected him to Marcus and Elena's murders. Santos made the decision to accelerate publication. Within hours, La Tercera's website would release Elena's photographs, the recorded evidence of systematic murder, and financial documents proving government corruption. The story would expose MinCorp International's illegal operations and the network of officials who had protected them. But as Carmen and Santos worked to finalize the article, they received a phone call that would change everything. "Detective Rodriguez?" The voice was female, frightened, speaking in rapid Spanish. "My name is Dr. Isabella Moreno. I'm a hydrologist who has been monitoring water contamination in the Andes. I know about the mining operation, and I know what happened to Marcus Chen and Elena Vargas." Carmen felt her heart racing. Another witness had survived to tell the truth about the conspiracy. "I have evidence that proves government officials have been covering up environmental crimes for years," Dr. Moreno continued. "But they know I have it. I think they're coming for me next." The conspiracy was about to claim another victim, unless Carmen could get to Dr. Moreno before Lieutenant Herrera's team silenced her forever. Dr. Isabella Moreno was hiding in an internet cafe in Valparaiso, constantly checking over her shoulder as she waited for Carmen's arrival. The hydrologist had spent 3 years documenting water contamination from illegal mining operations, never realizing that her research was building a case against people willing to commit murder to protect their secrets. Carmen raced through Santiago traffic, knowing that every minute of delay gave Lieutenant Herrera more time to track down Dr. Moreno and eliminate the last witness who could expose the full scope of the environmental conspiracy. Journalist Miguel Santos followed in a separate vehicle, carrying backup copies of all evidence in case something happened to Carmen. The Internet Cafe was located in a maze of narrow streets that wound through Valparaiso's historic port district. Carmen spotted Dr. Moreno immediately, a nervous woman in her 40s, clutching a backpack that undoubtedly contained evidence that could bring down the entire mining conspiracy. Dr. Moreno's story filled in the missing pieces of the environmental crimes that had cost Marcus and Elena their lives. As a government hydrologist, she had been conducting routine water quality assessments in the Andes when she discovered contamination levels that indicated massive illegal mining activity in protected watersheds. When she attempted to file official reports about the contamination, her supervisor, Dr. Ramon Aguirre, had blocked the reports from reaching higher authorities. Dr. Aguirre had been receiving payments from MinCorp International to suppress any scientific evidence of environmental damage from their illegal operations. But Dr. Moreno had continued documenting the contamination in secret, collecting water samples that proved the mining activities were poisoning indigenous communities downstream. Her evidence showed that at least 40,000 people were drinking water, contaminated with heavy metals at levels that would cause serious health problems for generations. "I tried to go through proper channels," Dr. Moreno explained, her voice shaking with fear and exhaustion. "But every official I contacted either ignored my reports or actively tried to discredit my findings. I realized the corruption went all the way to the top of the environmental ministry." Dr. Moreno's backpack contained 5 years of suppressed scientific reports, water analysis results that had been buried by corrupt officials, and correspondence proving that government scientists had been ordered to falsify data to hide the environmental damage caused by illegal mining. But her most damaging evidence was a recording of a conversation between Deputy Minister Eduardo Vasquez and MinCorp executives discussing plans to eliminate problematic researchers who threatened to expose their operations. The recording made it clear that Marcus and Elena's murders were part of a systematic campaign to silence environmental scientists and activists. Carmen realized that Dr. Moreno's evidence, combined with Elena's photographs and testimony, would expose the largest environmental conspiracy in Chilean history. But getting the evidence to safety would require staying one step ahead of corrupt officials who controlled most of the country's law enforcement resources. Santos called from his position monitoring police radio frequencies. "Carmen, you need to move now. Herrera has units converging on your location. He knows where Dr. Moreno is hiding." Through the cafe window, Carmen spotted unmarked police vehicles blocking both ends of the narrow street. Lieutenant Herrera had found them, and he was prepared to stage another accident to prevent the truth about the mining conspiracy from reaching the public. "There's a back exit through the kitchen," Dr. Moreno whispered urgently. "But they probably have that covered, too." Carmen made a desperate decision. She called Santos and instructed him to immediately publish everything they had discovered. Even if the story wasn't complete, if Herrera killed them in the internet cafe, at least the evidence would survive to expose the conspiracy. As Santos worked frantically to upload files to La Tercera's servers, Carmen and Dr. Moreno prepared to make a run for safety through the maze of Valparaiso's historic streets. But they both knew that corrupt police officers with superior numbers and equipment would be nearly impossible to outrun. Through the cafe window, Carmen watched Lieutenant Herrera directing his team into position. The corrupt officer was personally overseeing this operation, determined to eliminate the last witnesses who could destroy his career and expose the mining conspiracy that had made him wealthy. But what Carmen didn't know was that Elena Vargas had left one final surprise for anyone who tried to cover up her murder. A dead man's switch that would ensure the truth about the environmental conspiracy would be revealed, even if every witness was silenced. As Lieutenant Herrera's team closed in on the internet cafe, Carmen's phone buzzed with an automated email that would change everything. The message had been scheduled by Elena Vargas 2 years earlier, programmed to send if she failed to reset. A digital dead man's switch within 30 days of her planned return from the mountains. The email contained a link to a cloud storage account that Elena had filled with additional evidence about the illegal mining conspiracy, evidence that she had uploaded before departing for what would become her final climbing expedition. Elena's digital archive was staggering. She had been investigating MinCorp International's activities for months before her disappearance, collecting satellite imagery that showed the progression of illegal mining operations, financial documents proving bribery of government officials, and recorded conversations with whistleblowers inside the mining company who were afraid to come forward publicly. But, most importantly, Elena's archive contained a complete list of every environmental activist, scientist, and researcher who had been murdered to protect the mining conspiracy. The list included names, dates, and locations of 17 people who had been eliminated over the past 6 years, far more victims than Carmen had ever suspected. Dr. Moreno gasped as she recognized names on Elena's list, colleagues and fellow researchers who had supposedly died in wilderness accidents or vehicle crashes while investigating environmental crimes in remote areas of Chile. Maria Santos disappeared while studying wildlife displacement from mining activities, Dr. Moreno whispered, reading through Elena's documentation. Carlos Mendez vanished while documenting illegal logging that was clearing access roads for mining equipment. They weren't accidents. They were all murdered. Elena's archive also revealed the true scope of MinCorp International's illegal operations. The company wasn't just conducting unauthorized mining in protected areas. They were operating an environmental destruction network that spanned 3 countries and involved corrupt officials at every level of government. The dead man's switch had also automatically forwarded Elena's evidence to international environmental organizations, the International Criminal Court, and investigative journalists in Canada and the United States. Even if Carmen and Dr. Moreno were eliminated, the conspiracy would be exposed on a global scale. Santos called from his position monitoring the corrupt police operation. "Carmen, something's changed. Herrera's team is pulling back. They're receiving new orders." Through the cafe window, Carmen watched Lieutenant Herrera speaking urgently into his radio while his officers retreated to their vehicles. The corrupt officer's face showed panic and confusion as he realized that Elena's evidence was already spreading beyond their ability to contain it. Within minutes, Carmen's phone was buzzing with calls from international news organizations who had received Elena's archived evidence. The story was breaking simultaneously in major newspapers across 3 continents, making it impossible for corrupt officials to suppress or discredit the revelations. MinCorp International's stock price crashed as investors realized the company faced criminal charges in multiple countries for environmental crimes and murder. Deputy Minister Eduardo Vasquez was arrested at his home as federal prosecutors moved to seize financial records, proving his acceptance of bribes from the mining company. But Elena's final surprise was yet to come. Hidden in her digital archive was evidence that the illegal mining conspiracy was connected to an international network of environmental crime organizations that operated across Latin America. Marcus and Elena hadn't just stumbled onto a single illegal operation. They had discovered a criminal enterprise that was systematically destroying protected ecosystems throughout the region. Carmen realized that Elena Vargas had spent her final weeks alive, building a case that would expose not just her own murderers, but an entire criminal network that had been operating with impunity for years. Even in death, the mountain guide had found a way to protect the wilderness she had loved and ensure that her killers faced justice. As news of the conspiracy spread globally, Carmen received a phone call that would provide the final piece of Elena's puzzle. "Detective Rodriguez? This is Agent Patricia Dominguez with Interpol. We've been tracking MinCorp International's activities across multiple countries. Elena Vargas's evidence has given us everything we need to dismantle their entire operation." The investigation that had started with 2 missing climbers was about to expose the largest environmental crime network in the history of Latin America. Agent Patricia Dominguez arrived in Santiago within hours, carrying evidence that would reveal the true scope of the criminal network that had murdered Marcus and Elena. Interpol had been tracking MinCorp International's activities across 7 countries, but Elena's archived evidence provided the missing connections that tied together environmental crimes spanning from Mexico to Argentina. The international investigation revealed that MinCorp was just one tentacle of a massive criminal enterprise called Extractive Solutions Network, a shadowy organization that specialized in illegal resource extraction from protected wilderness areas throughout Latin America. The network operated by bribing government officials, eliminating environmental activists, and using sophisticated technology to avoid detection by satellite monitoring systems. Elena's evidence showed that the Haiti network had perfected a systematic approach to environmental crime. They would identify valuable mineral deposits in protected areas, establish illegal extraction operations using helicopters and remote equipment, bribe local officials to suppress investigation, and eliminate anyone who threatened to expose their activities. The body count was staggering. Agent Dominguez presented Carmen with evidence linking the network to 47 murders across 7 countries. Environmental scientists, indigenous rights activists, government whistleblowers, and journalists who had gotten too close to the truth about illegal mining operations. Each murder had been carefully staged to appear as an accident or natural disaster. Victims disappeared during wilderness expeditions, died in vehicle crashes on remote mountain roads, or succumbed to mysterious illnesses after visiting areas where the network was conducting operations. But Elena Vargas had been different from previous victims. As an experienced mountain guide with extensive knowledge of the Andes, she had been able to evade the network's killers long enough to document their operations and create the digital dead man's switch that would ultimately expose their crimes. Dr. Isabella Moreno's water contamination data proved that the network's activities had poisoned ecosystems across the continent. Communities in Peru, Colombia, Bolivia, and Ecuador were suffering from contaminated water sources that would remain toxic for decades. The environmental damage represented ecological genocide on a scale that dwarfed anything previously documented in Latin America. Agent Dominguez revealed that the network was ultimately controlled by a consortium of international mining corporations working with corrupt officials at the highest levels of government in multiple countries. The conspiracy involved cabinet-level ministers, Supreme Court justices, and military commanders who used their positions to protect illegal operations in exchange for massive bribes. Carmen learned that Lieutenant Carlos Herrera was just a small player in the network's structure. The corrupt police officer reported to a cell leader who coordinated elimination operations across Chile and Argentina. The cell leader reported to regional commanders who managed environmental crime activities throughout South America. But the most shocking revelation came when Agent Dominguez showed Carmen financial records proving that the network had been operating with knowledge and support from intelligence agencies in multiple countries. Government officials weren't just accepting bribes to ignore environmental crimes. They were actively participating in a conspiracy to eliminate anyone who threatened corporate access to natural resources in protected areas. Elena's archive contained recorded phone conversations between network leaders discussing plans to expand their operations into the Amazon rainforest and Arctic wilderness areas. The criminal organization was planning environmental destruction on a global scale, using murder and corruption to clear the way for resource extraction that would accelerate climate change and species extinction. As the scope of the conspiracy became clear, Carmen realized that Marcus and Elena's deaths represented just the tip of an iceberg of environmental crime that threatened ecosystems worldwide. The 2 climbers had died because they witnessed evidence of a criminal network that viewed wilderness areas as nothing more than profit centers to be exploited, regardless of the environmental and human cost. Agent Dominguez coordinated with law enforcement agencies across 7 countries to launch simultaneous raids on network facilities. In a single day, over 200 suspects were arrested, including government ministers, mining executives, military officers, and the killers who had personally eliminated environmental activists. But the network's leaders had anticipated eventual exposure. As arrest warrants were being executed across Latin America, intelligence agencies discovered that the conspiracy's top commanders had implemented an escape plan that would allow them to continue their operations from a new base of operations. The fight to bring down the network that murdered Marcus and Elena was far from over. As international law enforcement agencies executed coordinated raids across Latin America, the leaders of the Extractive Solutions Network vanished like ghosts. Within hours of the first arrests, private jets departed from hidden airstrips in remote locations, carrying the conspiracy's top commanders to countries without extradition treaties. Agent Dominguez monitored the escape attempts from Interpol's coordination center in Santiago, watching as sophisticated tracking systems showed the network's assets being rapidly transferred to offshore accounts and shell corporations. The criminal organization had spent years preparing for this moment, creating multiple layers of protection for their most valuable personnel and resources. Carmen worked with international investigators to piece together the escape routes. The network's leaders had established safe houses in countries across Africa and Asia, where they could continue coordinating illegal extraction operations using encrypted communication systems and cryptocurrency transactions that were nearly impossible to trace. But Elena Vargas had anticipated this possibility. Hidden in her digital archive was evidence that the network had been preparing escape plans for over 2 years, including detailed documentation of safe house locations, financial account numbers, and communication protocols that would allow investigators to track the fleeing criminals. The Mountain Guide's final gift to the investigation was a complete organizational chart of the network's leadership structure, including real names, aliases, and photographs of individuals who had operated in shadows for decades. Elena had somehow infiltrated the organization's most secure communications and documented their contingency plans with the thoroughness of a professional intelligence operative. Dr. Alexander Kozlov, the network's supreme commander, had fled to a compound in Myanmar where he believed he could continue operations beyond the reach of international law enforcement. But Elena's archive revealed that Kozlov had made a critical mistake. He had maintained direct communication with operational commanders who were still coordinating resource extraction activities across 3 continents. Carmen watched from the coordination center as intelligence agencies used Elena's information to track Kozlov's communications in real time. The network leader was still issuing orders to subordinates, unaware that every encrypted message was being intercepted and decoded by international law enforcement. The breakthrough came when Kozlov ordered the assassination of 3 journalists who were preparing to publish additional exposés about the network's activities. The murder contracts were intercepted, allowing authorities to protect the intended victims while gathering evidence of the network leader's continued criminal activities. Agent Dominguez coordinated with Myanmar authorities to arrest Kozlov at his supposed safe house compound. The raid revealed a sophisticated command center where the network leader had been planning to expand operations into African wilderness areas, targeting national parks and indigenous territories for illegal mineral extraction. But Kozlov's capture revealed an even more disturbing truth about the network's operations. The criminal organization wasn't just extracting resources illegally. They were conducting biological warfare against indigenous communities by deliberately contaminating water sources with toxic chemicals designed to cause long-term health problems that would force people to abandon their ancestral lands. Carmen felt sick as she reviewed evidence showing that the network had been testing chemical weapons on isolated communities for years, perfecting methods of environmental poisoning that would clear indigenous territories for mining operations, while making the attacks appear to be natural contamination events. Marcus Chen and Elena Vargas had died because they witnessed not just illegal mining, but genocide, a systematic campaign to eliminate indigenous peoples and destroy protected ecosystems for corporate profit. The scope of the crimes documented In Elena's archive made this case the largest environmental war crimes investigation in history. The network had committed acts that violated international laws protecting both the environment and indigenous peoples, crimes that carried potential sentences of life imprisonment for surviving conspirators. As Kozlov was extradited to face international criminal charges, Carmen realized that Elena's investigation had exposed more than a criminal conspiracy. It had revealed a new form of warfare where environmental destruction was being used as a weapon against indigenous peoples and future generations. The mountain guide, who had died trying to protect Chile's wilderness, had ultimately saved ecosystems and communities across multiple continents. The trial of Dr. Alexander Kozlov and 47 co-conspirators became the most significant environmental war crimes prosecution in international legal history. Carmen testified before the International Criminal Court in The Hague, presenting Elena's evidence to a panel of judges who would determine the fate of the criminal network that had murdered Marcus Chen and Elena Vargas. The courtroom fell silent. As Carmen played Elena's final audio recording, the mountain guide's voice echoing through the chamber as she described the systematic destruction of protected ecosystems and the murder of environmental activists who had tried to expose the crimes. "They're not just stealing resources," Elena's recorded voice testified from beyond the grave. "They're committing genocide against the earth itself, poisoning entire watersheds and eliminating anyone who tries to protect what remains of our natural world." Elena's sister, Sophia, now 10 years old, sat in the gallery throughout the proceedings. The young girl clutched a photograph of her mother standing proudly on a mountain summit, the same peaks where Elena had made her final stand against environmental criminals. Dr. Isabella Moreno testified about the water contamination that had poisoned indigenous communities across 7 countries. Her scientific evidence, combined with Elena's documentation, proved that the network had deliberately used environmental destruction as a weapon of war against peoples who refused to abandon their ancestral territories. Lieutenant Carlos Herrera, the corrupt police officer who had personally executed Marcus and Elena, broke down during his testimony and confessed to 17 murders committed over 5 years. His detailed account of the network's elimination operations revealed the cold calculation behind each killing. The way environmental activists had been hunted like animals in the wilderness, they had died trying to protect. "We were told they were terrorists who threatened national security," Herrera sobbed during cross-examination, "but they were just people who cared about the environment. They were murdered for trying to protect clean water and wildlife." MinCorp International ceased to exist as a corporate entity, its assets seized and distributed to environmental restoration projects in affected areas. The company's executives faced individual prosecution for crimes against humanity, their personal fortunes confiscated to fund decades of ecosystem rehabilitation. But the most powerful testimony came from indigenous leaders whose communities had been targeted by the network's chemical warfare campaigns. Elder Maria Huanca from Bolivia described watching her people suffer mysterious illnesses after the network contaminated their water sources with heavy metals designed to cause neurological damage in children. "They wanted to make us sick, so we would abandon our lands," Elder Huanca testified through an interpreter. "They were stealing our future by poisoning our children." The judges delivered their verdict after 3 weeks of deliberation. Dr. Alexander Kozlov was sentenced to life imprisonment for crimes against humanity and environmental war crimes. His co-conspirators received sentences ranging from 25 years to life, with no possibility of parole for those directly involved in murders. Carmen felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and sadness as she watched the criminals who had killed Marcus and Elena receive their sentences. Justice had been served, but it couldn't bring back the 2 climbers or undo the environmental damage that would take decades to repair. Elena's digital archive became the foundation for new international laws protecting environmental activists and establishing criminal penalties for corporations that deliberately destroy protected ecosystems. The Vargas Protocol created legal frameworks that would prevent future environmental war crimes by making corporate executives personally liable for ecosystem destruction. But, as Carmen prepared to return to Chile, she received a message that would reveal Elena's final secret, something that would change how the world understood environmental protection and the people who dedicated their lives to preserving wilderness areas. The message came from an encrypted account that Elena had programmed to activate only after the criminal network's leaders were convicted and sentenced. What Elena had discovered in the mountains went beyond even the international conspiracy that had cost her life. The encrypted message that arrived after the verdicts contained coordinates that led Carmen to a location she had never seen in Elena's previous evidence. A cave system hidden deep within Cerro Tres Monjas, accessible only by following a route that Elena had marked with almost impossible precision. Carmen assembled one final expedition team to investigate Elena's last secret. Dr. Patricia Núñez, the geologist who had analyzed contamination evidence throughout the investigation, joined the team along with Agent Dominguez and two specialized cave rescue experts. The journey to Elena's coordinates required technical climbing skills that pushed the team to their limits. The route wound through terrain so treacherous that Carmen understood why Elena and Marcus had been the only people to discover what was hidden in these remote peaks. The cave entrance was concealed behind a waterfall that cascaded down granite cliffs, creating a curtain of mist that made the opening nearly invisible from any distance. Elena had marked the location with small stone cairns that blended perfectly with the natural landscape, a navigation system that only an experienced mountain guide would recognize. Inside the cave, Elena had created a permanent research station that revealed the true scope of her environmental investigations. Sophisticated scientific equipment lined the cavern walls, powered by solar panels and batteries that Elena had somehow transported to this impossible location over multiple climbing expeditions. But it was Elena's research findings that left Carmen and her team speechless. Elena had discovered that the illegal mining operations were just the surface layer of environmental crimes being committed in the Andes. The mountain guide had been documenting systematic ecosystem destruction across the entire mountain range, tracking the interconnected effects of mining, deforestation, and chemical contamination on a scale that no government agency had ever attempted. Her research showed that the Extractive Solutions Network was part of an even larger conspiracy involving climate engineering, deliberate manipulation of mountain ecosystems to accelerate snowpack melting and redirect water resources to areas controlled by multinational corporations. Elena's data proved that the network wasn't just stealing minerals from protected areas. They were systematically altering mountain weather patterns to control water supplies across 3 countries, creating artificial droughts and floods that would force governments to accept corporate control of water resources. The Cave Research Station contained 5 years of meteorological data showing how the network used high-altitude chemical dispersal to modify cloud formation and precipitation patterns. Elena had documented weather manipulation activities that violated international treaties and constituted environmental terrorism on a continental scale. Dr. Núñez examined Elena's research with growing amazement. She discovered that they're not just destroying local ecosystems, they're engineering climate change to create water scarcity that will make their illegal operations seem like legitimate solutions to resource shortages. Elena's final research revealed that the network had been testing weather modification technologies for over a decade, perfecting methods of climate manipulation that could be used to control entire populations by controlling their access to water resources. The mountain guide had realized that exposing the illegal mining operations would only stop one aspect of a much larger conspiracy to weaponize environmental destruction for corporate profit and political control. Carmen found Elena's final written message preserved in a waterproof container at the center of the research station. The document was addressed to whoever eventually discovered her secret cave laboratory, a letter from beyond the grave that would inspire a new generation of environmental protection efforts. "If you're reading this," Elena's letter began, "it means I didn't survive to expose the full truth about what they're doing to our mountains. But my death won't be meaningless. If you use this research to stop them from destroying the climate that sustains all life on Earth." Elena's research station became the foundation for a new international environmental monitoring system designed to detect and prevent weather modification activities. The mountain guide who had died trying to protect a single wilderness area had ultimately saved the global climate system from corporate manipulation. But Elena's letter contained one final revelation that would ensure her sacrifice was never forgotten. Elena's final letter revealed that she had been working with a network of environmental scientists and activists across multiple continents, who had suspected the existence of weather manipulation programs but lacked the evidence to prove their theories. The mountain guide's research had provided the missing proof that would expose climate engineering as a tool of corporate warfare. Carmen returned to Santiago carrying Elena's research data, knowing that this information would transform global environmental protection efforts. The cave laboratory became a shrine to Elena's memory and a permanent research station where scientists from around the world could study the long-term effects of the network's weather modification activities. Elena's daughter, Sophia, now approaching her 11th birthday, had grown up understanding that her mother died protecting something larger than any individual: the climate system that sustained all life on Earth. Sophia announced her intention to become an environmental scientist, dedicating her life to continuing her mother's work protecting mountain ecosystems. The Elena Vargas Institute for Environmental Protection was established using funds seized from the criminal network, creating a global organization dedicated to detecting and preventing environmental crimes before they could cause irreversible damage. The Institute's headquarters was built near the cave where Elena had conducted her final research, serving as both a memorial and a working laboratory. Carmen left police work to become the Institute's first director of criminal investigations, using her experience exposing the network to train a new generation of environmental crime investigators. Her work focused on identifying early warning signs of corporate environmental warfare and developing rapid response protocols to protect activists who uncovered illegal operations. Marcus Chen's family established a scholarship program that brought young environmental scientists from around the world to study at the Elena Vargas Institute. Marcus's passion for combining technology with environmental protection lived on through innovative monitoring systems that could detect illegal mining and weather modification activities from satellite imagery. Dr. Isabella Moreno became the Institute's chief scientist, expanding her water contamination research into a comprehensive global monitoring program that tracked environmental crimes across all continents. Her work helped identify and shut down dozens of illegal operations before they could cause the kind of damage that the Extractive Solutions Network had inflicted on Latin American ecosystems. But perhaps the most important legacy of Elena's sacrifice was the transformation in how environmental activism was understood and protected. The international community recognized that people who dedicated their lives to protecting wilderness areas were often the first line of defense against environmental crimes that threatened all of humanity. New laws protected environmental activists as essential personnel whose work served global security interests. Governments established rapid response teams trained to protect researchers who uncovered evidence of environmental crimes, preventing the kind of systematic elimination that had allowed the network to operate for years. The mountain peaks where Elena and Marcus had died became a protected memorial wilderness area where no industrial activity would ever be permitted. Visitors to the Elena Vargas Memorial Wilderness could hike trails that the mountain guide had used during her research expeditions, understanding through direct experience the landscapes that she had died trying to protect. Carmen often returned to those peaks, standing at the viewpoints where Elena had documented environmental crimes that threatened the entire planet. The detective understood that Elena's story represented more than a successful investigation. It proved that individual courage and dedication could expose and defeat even the most powerful environmental criminals. Elena's research continued to guide environmental protection efforts decades after her death. Her scientific methodology and investigative techniques taught to activists around the world who carried forward her mission of defending wilderness areas against corporate destruction. The mountain guide who had vanished into the Andes had ultimately become immortal, her voice speaking for the environment long after her physical presence was gone, ensuring that future generations would inherit a world where wilderness areas were protected by people willing to risk everything to defend them. But Elena's story would have one final chapter that would reveal the ultimate meaning of her sacrifice. 25 years after Elena Vargas and Marcus Chen disappeared into the Chilean Andes, their story had become legend among environmental activists worldwide. But it was Sofia Vargas, Elena's daughter, who would provide the final chapter in a story that had transformed global environmental protection. Sofia had grown up to become one of the world's leading experts in mountain ecosystem preservation, following her mother's path into the same peaks where Elena had made her final stand against environmental criminals. At 35, Sofia possessed her mother's intuitive understanding of mountain environments combined with scientific training that Elena could never have imagined. On the 25th anniversary of her mother's death, Sofia led a memorial expedition to the cave laboratory where Elena had conducted her final research. The site had become a pilgrimage destination for environmental scientists, but Sofia's visit would reveal something that no previous expedition had discovered. Deep within the cave system, Sofia found a chamber that even her mother's thorough exploration had missed. Hidden behind a natural rock formation was a space that Elena had used as her most private refuge, a place where the mountain guide had recorded personal messages that revealed her true understanding of what her environmental work might cost. Sofia discovered video recordings that Elena had made during her final weeks, messages addressed to her daughter that the mountain guide hoped would never need to be found. But Elena had understood that her investigation of the environmental conspiracy might end with her death, and she wanted Sofia to understand why she had chosen to continue despite the dangers. Mi amor. Elena's voice spoke from recordings that had waited 25 years to be discovered. If you're seeing this, it means I didn't come home from the mountains, but I need you to understand that I didn't leave you. I stayed to protect the world that you and all children deserve to inherit. Elena's personal messages revealed that she had known about the threats against environmental activists long before. She and Marcus began their final expedition. The mountain guide had chosen to continue her research, knowing that exposure of the criminal network would likely cost her life, but believing that protecting future generations justified any personal sacrifice. But Elena's most profound message to her daughter was about the spiritual connection between human beings and the wilderness areas that sustained all life. The mountain guide had experienced something in those peaks that went beyond scientific research, a deep understanding that protecting the environment was protecting the sacred foundation of existence itself. The mountains taught me that we are not separate from nature, Elena's recorded voice explained to her grown daughter. We are part of the same system, the same life force that flows through every living thing. When we protect wilderness, we protect ourselves. When we allow it to be destroyed, we destroy our own souls. Sophia understood that her mother's environmental activism had been fundamentally spiritual, a recognition that human beings had a sacred responsibility to protect the natural world that made their existence possible. Elena's investigation of environmental crimes had been motivated not just by scientific concern, but by love for the life force that connected all beings. The final recording showed Elena standing at the entrance to the cave laboratory, looking out toward the peaks where she would soon encounter the criminals who would end her life. Her face showed peace rather than fear, the expression of someone who had found meaning that transcended personal survival. "I may not live to see the world we can create," Elena said in her final message, "but I know that people like you will continue this work. The mountains will outlast all of us, but only if each generation finds the courage to protect them." Sophia emerged from her mother's hidden chamber, understanding that Elena's legacy wasn't just about exposing environmental crimes or protecting wilderness areas. Her mother's true gift was demonstrating that individual human beings could choose to live in harmony with natural systems, even when that choice required ultimate sacrifice. As Sophia stood at the cave entrance where her mother had recorded those final messages, she felt Elena's presence in the mountain wind that carried the scent of snow and stone. The peaks that had witnessed Elena's death had also preserved her spirit, making her part of the eternal landscape that she had died to protect. The mountains had claimed Elena Vargas, but they had also made her immortal, forever part of the wilderness that would inspire future generations to find the same courage, the same love, and the same willingness to sacrifice everything for the sacred responsibility of protecting the natural world. Elena's story ended where it had begun, in the silence of the Andes peaks, where the wind still carries her voice to anyone brave enough to listen to what the mountains are trying to tell us about the price of protecting what we love most. If this story left you as impacted as it did me, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and comment your opinion below. Each comment is like a new piece that can help unravel other mysteries like this one. Sometimes the greatest mysteries aren't about what happened, but about what we're willing to do when we discover the truth.